I think the first thing for me is just honestly just seeing people's faces.
Sure.
You're working together with these people.
Sure.
There's just something about being in a synchronous session with people that you're working with, even every now and then, that feels good, and where you can feel each other's energy. And you're right, it does not need to be energy pumping, we're doing it, right?
Yep.
It could also be empathetic energy, like, hey, look, we're in this together. It's going to be rough, but hey, let's stick it in. Let's keep going, right? So there's different types of energy. It's not just positive energy. It's also, energy of strength and empathy that you can kind of channel there.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leading from Afar, a show by remote leaders for remote leaders, where we dive into the most important topics facing leaders in the future of work. I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. I was the first hire at Envision, one of the first all-remote companies, back in 2012. I've since helped build and scale multiple remote teams as an early employee or consultant. In each episode, we geek out doing deep dives on specific topics like within async, hiring the best talent anywhere, how to create a fun and engaging environment remotely, and so much more. This show was created to help managers leading remotely upskill themselves to help them build world-class remote cultures. If you enjoy this content, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, share it with friends and colleagues, and feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website. Everybody, thanks for tuning into today's episode of Leading from Afar. I'm Scott Markovitz, and today I'm joined by my friend Jakob, the CEO of Butter. So Jakob is building a far more valuable and far more engaging alternative to both Zoom and Google Meet. So across the first couple of seasons, we've spoken at length and will continue to speak at length about asynchronous communication and how it's really the future of all work, not just remote work. Today, we're actually going to look at the other end, and we're going to be talking about synchronous meetings and communication. So all of us remote leaders certainly do believe there is, and there certainly are, the right times and use cases for synchronous versus asynchronous. So today we're going to nerd out and do a deep dive into when and why you should be doing synchronous meetings, what a great synchronous meeting looks like and doesn't look like, and how really asynchronous communication is really embedded into synchronous meetings itself, and a whole lot more. So, hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Jakob. Thank you for joining today. How's everything going?
Very good, Scott, and thank you so much for having me today.
I appreciate you joining. I've had you in mind for probably since season one, because I know we've gone back a couple of years, wanted to have you on, so happy to finally have you joining us. And I've heard that it's slightly hot in Northern Europe. We'd love to hear a little bit more about what's going on over there.
Yeah, man. Like I'm sitting here in my living room, and I have to open the window, and like maybe you'll hear a few traffic noises because of that, because it's really like a freaking a steam bath in here. So
unbelievable. Yeah. I recorded an episode yesterday with somebody from Klaus, who's now in Barcelona, but she was in Estonia with the team last week, and she was complaining even in Estonia it was also like 30-something degrees, and everyone I've spoken to across Northern Europe has just been complaining significantly the last the week so about the heat and the craziness over there. But usually the way we start each episode is with a non-topic related question. And as we were talking offline, you had mentioned that you had recently gotten the team together. So finally, after a couple of years, you had the first IRL. So maybe we'd love to hear about that. And I think obviously IRLs are super exciting. Something that came across through the pandemic, all this obviously wrong ideas about remote work. There was a misconception of, when you go remote, you never see each anymore, right? You just work from your house in like this dark little cave, and nobody exists in the real world anymore. Like you're totally become like a bot. But obviously you speak to any of us who've been doing this long enough, and we're all significant advocates for getting people together. So yeah, please let's hear about how you got the team together and all the logistics and pieces and excitement and what you did and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Oh man, the logistics, they still give me nightmares. But you're entirely right. Like, I mean, we've been building Butter for 2 years. So some of these people I've been working with for 2 years, even more. Some of them have been working with pre-Butter. So meeting with many of them for the first time last week. So we had our first Butter meet, as it was called, in Lisbon, in Portugal last week.
Nice.
And we flew, I think it was 14 people along with 7 spouses that we flew into Lisbon and spent a good week together. Yes, spouses too. Which was also super special.
Yeah.
Man, it was super special because you see that other side of people, and we made them. Of course, they weren't part of everything, but they were part of solid chunks, and I think it was absolutely amazing to see that too. We had a few people, 3 people stuck in that weren't able to get into Lisbon. So we made a second mini Butter meet in Dubai, where we had like 3 people fly in there, rent an Airbnb for them, and like made all events online via Butter, of course. But it was simply amazing. I was in awe of the people that I'm working together with. It was very special.
No, that's incredible. I mean, I love the idea of bringing spouses. I remember when Envision did an IRL a number of years ago that I went to. I think they didn't fly spouses in probably because there was, I don't know, 900 people or something at the time. So that probably was a little bit difficult financially to do that. But they were very supportive in like covering costs of like babysitters, to kind of help, I guess, the spouse who's kind of left at home, to kind of get support and things like that. So I think, that's a super important thing for companies who are thinking and planning these IRLs, right? You bring a person out wherever they are. It's great. It's wonderful for them. But like if they're married, if they have kids, like, okay, there's things that are still left back wherever they are. And there's an impact to that, right? If you have a couple of kids, I have 4 kids at home. When I went to an IRL, my wife was like, "Oh my God, when are you coming back? When are you coming back?" So to have an opportunity to kind of, even support by giving, covering like babysitter expenses to be able to help, something that's left back, I think is fine. And I absolutely love, on top of that, the idea of doing a secondary one, covering those 3 people who couldn't make it into Lisbon for, again, whatever reasons, and not saying, okay, sorry you couldn't make it, or maybe here's like some kind of gift, or maybe we're kind of, we'll give you like $1,000 to go on like your own vacation, which I know some companies have done similar. But the fact that you found a place to get those 3 people together, so they still have the opportunity to meet in person, I think that's absolutely fantastic. So great job in doing that. I give a lot of kudos to you and the team for organizing that.
It was logistically difficult, but yeah.
I can imagine. How many people are with the team now?
We're 18 people with the team.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Full time. Yeah.
Amazing. So the way we start off is
across 11 countries or something, like stretching from, I think, Bali in Indonesia to the east to Vancouver in Canada to the west. So extremely broad, also extremely broad in terms of time zones, which I'm sure we'll get more into in the episode today.
Indeed. Yeah. So the way we start off is very easy. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us a little bit more about Butter. Again, I've known quite much about you guys for a while. We've had many conversations a few years ago. I've been a user myself with my team. So yeah, softball question. Tell us a little bit more about Jakob, a little bit about Butter, origin story, what you do, and then we'll dive into today's topic.
Sounds awesome, Scott. Yeah, so my background was initially in strategy consulting. I was in what's now Bain & Company in the Nordics for close to 4 years. Then got the opportunity to build a digital marketing company in Indonesia, of all places. So went there in 2014, built it up to, I think we were close to 50 people in the team, at clients like Google, L'Oreal, Nestle. And then we sold it off to a Japanese entrant. And I stuck around for another year in Asia or so, but then wanted to build something that was way more scalable. So left for Denmark in 2018 and started up a company within game streaming. Wanted to kind of solve a discovery problem that people had with content in that space. Found some great people, including my now co-founders, Chris and Adam, that we built up a product with and got quite a bit of users on, but there just wasn't enough traction. And it turned out we weren't really solving a real problem, which was a big learning for us. So we had to kind of turn the keys there in early 2020, but thought we had something great going, especially with Chris, Adam, and myself. We had the team of I think it's called the hipster, the hacker, and the hustler, kind of the beautiful trio there.
Isn't there a movie, something like that?
Exactly.
Marvel
That sounds like a
films.
movie title, right? Yeah, so I mean, when you've got something special going, you don't just leave each other. So we wanted to build something together again. We built our previous company as a remote team because, I guess, very much because of my experiences in in Asia. We've been able to recruit from there. Plus Adam, he's Malaysian but lives in Indonesia, so he'd been working remotely as well. And we thought there was something special going on there, and indeed there was, because like a month after COVID struck, and everyone was simply forced to work remotely. Yep. And we thought that we wanted to share our good experiences from building our previous company and working remotely there, while discovering what kind of problems, what kind of issues that these remote teams might have. So doing proper problem discovery as opposed to what we've done previously.
Yep.
That was why we started doing trainings and workshops for teams and startups that had been pushed remotely by COVID, sharing our best practices. And it turned out that we were the ones that were having the difficulties in doing just that. So, I mean, I'm a pretty experienced workshop facilitator. I've done it both in consultancy and in agency, but it was so difficult to do it remotely. And that was because of these two big reasons that we saw. One thing was the technical overload that I faced as a facilitator, or because I had to handle a lot of different links like Miro, Mentimeter, Slido, and send those around, open breakouts, open polls. It was just such a lot of stuff that I had to do. And the second thing was they were just inherently non-engaging. It was so hard to get engagement and interactivity into these collaborative sessions. And we thought, hey, we must be able to build something that's just inherently better for these types of sessions. And that's what Butter was born out of.
Amazing. There always has to be a better option than Zoom. Because Zoom is just it's terribly the worst. But I'm happy to try to avoid using every opportunity I can. But today's conversation, again, we've had quite a number of conversations over the first two seasons of the show around asynchronous, more focused, like the debate between synchronous and asynchronous, very much heavy focused on the asynchronous side. So today, I think we're going to kind of flip the switch a little bit and focus more on the synchronous. Obviously, Butter is a platform for synchronous meetings, and obviously provides a lot more value and engagement and things which you obviously need when you have a synchronous meeting. And so we're going to kind of focus on that today. So I think the first question is, I'm assuming here, right, that since you're building a tool to make synchronous meetings more engaging, that your team is probably not fully async. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your team operates itself.
Yeah. So you said it very correctly, right? I mean, we're building Butter to solve as a platform for synchronous collaborative sessions. So that's kind of the overall direction that we're taking. We're attacking the most complex of these synchronous collaborative sessions first, which are workshops, trainings, anything where you have to structure them a lot and facilitate them heavily. So that's what we're building Butter for. And I think, firstly, I'd like to say that async is incredibly powerful. And it's been underestimated by organizations previously many, many times. And therefore, I fully agree with the sentiment. I fully agree with the overall sentiment in the remote community that companies need to become more asynchronous. I do think that it's an overreaction. Like, it's a reaction that comes because companies traditionally have just been so synchronous. So many meetings have been held for no reasons whatsoever. And therefore, people begin talking very much in the other direction. Yep. But I do believe that the current discourse is very black and white. So it's like sync bad, async good. And it's just not as simple as that. So therefore, I still believe that synchronous is the best place to kind of have collaborative and creative sessions, and you yield much faster results, and decisions are also taken much faster. Plus, it is simply the best way to connect as human beings still. I mean, we were built as synchronous organisms, if you can say that. But it is incredibly important that you do them correctly, and I do agree that a lot of companies have simply not been doing synchronous sessions correctly.
No, I completely agree, and I definitely believe that there was so much push off, especially during the pandemic, when, again, all these companies were in the office and moved remotely. And because I couldn't see you, I needed to kind of replicate that by doing a Zoom stand up in the morning, and Zoom in the end, and Zoom fatigue and things like that. So the idea is it was like so much overload because, again, managers were afraid. They didn't know if you were doing anything if they didn't see you. So they're like, okay, let's do all these Zooms, and that became overwhelming. And then obviously the movement the last year was like asynchronous. Let's get the hell away from being on Zoom calls all day. Just leave me alone. Let me get work done. Let me focus on that. It's been incredible. I can do stuff. Go away.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you there, Scott, right? I mean, and I think a lot of those things came because people were trying to, as you very correctly said, trying to just replicate the office one-to-one in a remote organization. And that's like, you couldn't do it like there's both a lot of in-office traditions that are just not useful, like the daily stand-up, and there's a lot of things you can't replicate one-to-one and should not replicate one-to-one when you're in the digital.
Yeah. So I want to break, I mean, you led to a kind of a great introduction of the use cases of having synchronous meetings. And I completely agree. The two opportunities are obviously, number one, team building, relationship building, right? That can't be done asynchronously. That can't be done through Slack. I've been a big believer in that for 10 and a half years. The other case is collaboration and kind of those creative meetings you have together. But I see, even in that case, you have like two separate collaborative type meetings, like brainstorming type meetings. You have one side where it's like, hey, there's an issue going on, like right now. Let's get people together to kind of brainstorm. We don't know what the issue is. So I had on, I think it was early season 2, we had Jonathan, the CEO from Maze, and he had brought a kind of a great example that he had learned of, the rock and the monkey issue. And the synchronous meetings were great for those things where, hey, there's an issue. We don't know what the problem is. We don't know how to fix it. Let's kind of get the brains together and come up with a solution. So kind of on that side, we have, hey, we have a problem now, and we need to solve this problem like right now. So let's get the brains together, collaborate, brainstorm, great. On the other side, again, you also have those brainstorming collaborative sessions where there is no direct action that's taken now, right? We're just kind of throwing some ideas together. We're sharing some thoughts. Okay, then we're taking that, then we're post. Okay, maybe there's a follow-up, whatever it is. And for me, I believe like the second category should also be async, because again, you can kind of argue, there's some research probably on both sides that people being able to kind of take the time to think through the problem and think kind of a proper solution, creative solution, go through like the feedback, give the feedback in a proper way. And also, in many cases, like the person who's running the meeting doesn't have, I'll call it the right skills to make sure that everyone's engaged, right? If you have 10 people, let's say even 6 people in a meeting, is every one of those 6 people having the same exact amount of time, the same exact opportunity to voice their feedback, where you kind of have like me, the loudmouth extroverts who are the one who are kind of like jumping in all the time with like ideas and kind of taking over the meeting, and like your introverts are just kind of sitting back there and like not being engaged. So is your, again, collaborative, yes, but do you feel even maybe within the collaborative meetings, is there maybe some cases where synchronous is better obviously, like, again, that monkey issue, we need to solve the problem now, and maybe less so, or again, there's still a value, even if you're not going to take a decision right now, just to kind of get the brains together, get some ideas flowing, and then maybe after that, take it like asynchronously.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the first, again, those two types of meetings, it's a great way of bucketing them, Scott, and I very much agree with them. I think synchronous does a few things very well that async does not. Like, again, you mentioned the whole connecting with people for sure, right? I also think it helps you, especially when you've got video and audio, of course, but especially when you've got video, it helps you read cues. And we just build as people that can read cues, and they are very important in collaboration. We're actually building Butter to help people express themselves even more by using the power of digital to create more cues there. And the third point is that it is really quicker to brainstorm and build on each other's arguments. I would say for that second type that you're mentioning in terms of solving problems that do not necessarily need an action right now, but that might be very complex, a synchronous session does definitely have a place there. But it requires it requires a lot of pre-work. So it requires a lot of async work before the session and a lot of async work after the session for it to be be correct. So you can say, I mean, the pre-work before the session means that people need to have information that puts everyone kind of on the same level. So you need to create the same level of baseline. You cannot have too much information asymmetry when you drop into the meeting, because it should not be an informational meeting. It should be a collaborative meeting, right? So it shouldn't be too much information download in the meeting itself. You should also have had a clear agenda and clear questions to prepare before the meeting takes place. So you have, like, for instance, in our own internal Butter strategy meetings, which would be one of those types of sessions, we always ask people to do prep work before the meeting takes place with a number of key questions, so we all come in prepared and are able to build on those different angles of conversation in the meeting. Then the second part, in terms, like you mentioned, this whole engaging part, loudmouth speaking up and all of that, we believe very much in, say, the power of facilitation when it comes to remote collaborative sessions such as these. And it is incredibly important. Like, we believe that facilitation is becoming a skill that all people, all managers, project managers, even individual contributors that sometimes have to kind of take over meetings, need to acquire, because otherwise exactly what you're saying there will happen.
Yeah.
I think the last point to add to this is that after the meeting takes place, a lot of async work needs to take place as well, because you need to pull all these various threads that you've kind of opened up during the meeting. You need to pull them together and into one kind of consolidated package or consolidated thinking, so that the threads don't all spread out. And that kind of pulling the threads together is probably done better async, but weaving those threads out is better done sync, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. You kind of had a couple points in there, I think, that opened up another question that I have. It's a number of us, again, remote leaders over the years, and certainly recently, have been talking about, when to have sync meetings, and like why to have sync meetings, and kind of organization structure around that. So I wanted to kind of pull your thoughts. If a team does do synchronous meetings, like, should there be very clear guidelines on when you need a synchronous meeting versus an asynchronous meeting, why you need to have it versus not? And also, I think another thing on the back end, it's like, should there be the ability for recipients to opt out? And if there are like those guidelines for creating a meeting, organizing a meeting, and for opting in or opting out, like, what do you think those rules or those guidelines should look like?
Yeah. I think a lot of it actually relates to what I mentioned before with the pre-work, right? If you're not able to set up, like, the whole no agenda and no attenda, right? I mean, there's a truth to that, right? I mean, there's a truth to these kind of things. So being able to set up an agenda, being able to set up clear outcomes to the meetings, being able to allow people to do the prep work for the meetings, all of these things are, I believe, basis for having a synchronous meeting. So if you're not able to set up a clear agenda, if you're not able to allow people to prepare themselves, then it doesn't necessarily warrant a asynchronous session. I do believe that there are exceptions to this, like sometimes quick problem solving, like the monkey in the rock, you called it.
Yeah.
I love that. But then you're not. I mean, we often use Slack huddles for those problems, quick problem solving on the spot. Yeah. Hey, there's an issue. We need to get in. Let's solve it. Then you can of course do without the agenda and a lot of the pre-work. But aside from that, I do believe that these things are necessary. The whole allowing people to kind of opt out.
Yeah.
Sure, but that's like I think that's a symptomatic solution to a larger problem, right? I mean, allowing people to opt out of meetings if they don't think that there is an agenda, or they don't think that it kind of fulfills a certain number of criteria. Yeah. That's a way of the organization reacting to a more systemic problem.
For sure.
And, I mean, so I would say, like, overall, just spend async time on what async does best, so informational processes, slower thought processes, more deeper thoughts, and sync on what sync does best, so brainstorming, creativity, connections, decision making.
Yeah, I love that. One, I think your points, especially around like the facilitator idea, synchronous meetings have gotten a bad rap, obviously, especially the last year, which I think they rightfully deserve, because many of these meetings, especially historically, have been informational. Ooh, a tongue twister today. Which is, as you can imagine, it's one person, me. I create a Google slide or a PowerPoint, and I read for 30 or 60 minutes, word by word by word by word. And like, you all sit there and like, God, why couldn't you just send me this freaking document? And I would have read it in like 5 minutes. I would have sent you feedback. I would have given you comments and all that. So how can an organizer make these meetings, again, when they have to have synchronous meetings, more engaging? And how does Butter actually help with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% correct with the whole informational part. Like, I think most of the informational meetings we have in Butter are either memos or looms, right? So we use the async tools very much in terms of driving over information. Some of the informational meetings are synchronous meetings for smaller groups of people, but then we record them and kind of distribute them to the wider group. And again, the informational part of those meetings are like, then the people that are in there often collaborate. And again, the whole thing comes to the ability to set up, or the priority in setting up a lot of, like, again, the agenda and the outcomes, but setting up a lot of the abilities to interact and allowing the outcomes to have interactive components in them. That means if you have an informational meeting, sure, but interweave them with polls to have engagement, with whiteboards to make quick decisions or to kind of assess where people are at. And again, that's where Butter kind of comes in, because we allow people to set up a full meeting agenda and attach a lot of tools and various elements to that meeting. So you're able to interweave the informational elements with interactive elements such as polls, flashcards, whiteboards, you name it. I also think one type of informational meetings that still make a lot of sense to do sync are meetings where you want to bump up the energy of the organization. It's very hard to kind of bump up energy and get people as excited when things are done async, because you cannot feed off of each other's energy. And that's another thing that we built Butter for very much, right? We have video tool integrated, music playlists. There's a lot of reactions that people can use with big explosive reactions. You kind of feed off each other's energy when you're celebrating big victories, right? For instance. And all of that stuff is just done so much better in sync than it's done async. No, but again, even with these, like, be sure to kind of capture all of this and wrap it up nicely afterwards in an async package.
I love this point, especially about the energy. Especially thinking through Zoom, again, the horrible experience there. That opportunity, like in all hands, where maybe you closed a big deal or did something like that, right? All of a sudden you click, the Rocky music in the background. You put like the playlist, and all of a sudden, you get the energy like going up and down. And the emoji reactions Zoom, like by your little avatar, it's like versus in Butter, it's like it flashes in the screen and is bigger and it's more animated, and especially in Zoom, right? If you're not one of the first, 4 or 5 people, you don't see it. But in Butter, like, all the emojis come up and you have all that energy and action. So that's actually very interesting. I like that idea.
And I think just to shortly add to that point, you're totally right with this whole, like, if you're not one of the first 5 people in Zoom, then you're not seen. And I think one of the things that we actually kind of try to do, not explicitly but implicitly in Butter, is to kind of democratize interactivity and engagement. Because even if you're off screen, we've thought a lot about how do reactions feel? How can you interact even if you're not on the screen? How can you interact if you're on the second page of the profile images, or if you don't have your video on? And there's just a lot of ways that you can where you can use digital to democratize this kind of interactivity. Whereas Zoom and many of the legacy softwares, they've simply said, okay, we use video and audio as we do in real life. We plop on, a cutoff part of the person, and then, that's it for interactivity, right? So they're not kind of leaning into the software that we've got.
I want to pull that out, and I want you to go much more in depth of the functionality, because one of the questions that I had coming off like the facilitator idea and what we spoke about before, it's like when you have these synchronous meetings, how does the facilitator ensure, what's the best way to ensure that everyone has a voice, everyone has the opportunity to be engaged? And again, perfectly lining up, and again, where I want you to go in much more depth is, how does Butter allow that? Which again, Zoom, we know, doesn't do. Google Meet doesn't do. None of the tools do that. So how does Butter, again, make sure that those people who are off screen, who are maybe the introverts, can have much more of an opportunity to be engaged and to be more involved in the meeting itself?
Yeah, I think firstly, kind of taking to the role of the facilitator. And again, I really want to kind of also make the idea of the facilitator more broad, because we are all facilitators in a remote world. And I think that's incredibly important to kind of note. And I think the role of the facilitator starts before the session even begins, right? With
absolutely.
Firstly, with designing the agenda, with designing all the outcomes, all the different documents or kind of tools that you use during the session, but also very much in onboarding people to the session before the session takes place, and making sure you hear everyone's voice before the session takes place through polls or pre-work or whatever, right? So you make sure that you kind of get everyone on the same level before the session takes place. And I think that's the first part of kind of democratizing the session and making sure that you even the playing field during the session, both for the introverts and for the extroverts. And again, Butter allows for that through a lot of different ways of setting up the session. You're able to pre-plan breakouts. You're able to pre-plan all the different tools, such as flashcards, presentations, music playlists, everything that you'll be doing during the session. You're able to set that up beforehand, even together with other facilitators that you might be facilitating the session with. During the session itself, I think it's incredibly important for the facilitator to not just be speaking to the void, right? Sitting there with, a PowerPoint presentation and sharing screen all the time.
Yep.
I think it's incredibly important to have a lot of dynamism in the session and switch between various tools of various ways of interactivity that allows for everyone to participate. And again, some of the simpler tools that people know what are, like tools like polls. Everyone knows what a poll is. A bit more advanced tools that people gotten used to during the pandemic has been whiteboards such as Miro or Mural. We even have our own Butter whiteboard. And other ways such as, we have created flashcards where people can kind of pin their location on a map or, but all of these ways of having inclusive interactivity where you encourage everyone to join. So one way that we've done that with Butter is building a lot of different tools that create this kind of inclusive engagement and interactivity. The second part is through the very way that we've designed things like reactions that everyone can use all the time. And even if you're off screen, you see the reaction and you see the image of the person that's reacting. But also our speaker queue, for instance, that is again an iteration on the hands-up queue that we see in a lot of other tools. But the way it works is that the first person that spoke always comes first, and then people line up in a queue, as you'd expect, right?
Nice.
What that does, it makes the loudmouths, such as you and me, Scott, very aware that there's a certain number of people waiting after you to speak, so you kind of self-police. And secondly, it makes the introverts way more comfortable with just I put myself in the queue. I know I'll get my time. I don't have to all the time think about, when can I interject or whatever. Or so there's a lot of things that we built to kind of level the interactivity playing field with the engagement.
No, I love that. I love the idea of the queue, and again, having the opportunity. Okay, I'm in the queue. It's not. Is there going to be like a 20-second silence period where I can then kind of jump in or put my hand up kind of quietly and hope that somebody picks on me? Maybe kind of going back and trying to combining a lot of these points, but one of the ones again we mentioned about like the high energy, and especially maybe when you have like some good news and you put like the Rocky music in the background. I want to focus maybe on the very typical startup all hands meeting, right? Whether it's monthly, whether it's bi-weekly, whatever the time frame is. Again, most of the time these are informational. Not every time do you have some like fantastic, amazing news where you're going to have the Rocky music, pumping behind it. So is there, again, in this case, like, is it maybe better to do them maybe mostly asynchronous? Again, when you don't have like that high energy thing opportunity you could throw in there. Or if you do them synchronous, again, how, you've spoken about a couple of points, especially maybe from like an all hands perspective, where it could be, in your case, like 18 people, in other cases, 50 people, 100 people, hundreds of people who are watching this. Again, how do you make those more engaging and participatory? And again, when people are, especially if there's like 100 people on there and you're just reading through a Google Sheet and put some polls, but it's more informational, like, especially these days, right? The economy sucks. Everybody's laying off people. Like, it's not really great news. So people, is there really much people are going to be excited to be kind of sitting in a 60-minute kind of all hands meeting?
I hear you, Scott, and it's honestly something that I'll be very honest that we haven't cracked fully ourselves, and that I also think quite a lot about how do we use the all hands meetings in the best possible way. And I mean, all hands meetings per default in a lot of settings just aren't very collaborative. They're not collaborative sessions, right? If you look at how they were in physical, it's really not, right?
Yep.
And I think it's about understanding what kind of all hands you're doing. So, and a lot of the stuff will actually, like, we do not do a weekly all hands. We often, I think we often try to do a fortnightly all hands, 30 minutes. So it's not a lot, right?
Yeah, it's not terrible.
I think, no, it's not terrible. I said judgment, Scott. I think the first thing for me is just honestly just seeing people's faces. You're working together with these people.
Sure.
It's just something about being in a synchronous session with people that you're working with, even every now and then. That feels good, and where you can feel each other's energy. And you're right, it does not need to be energy pumping. We're doing it, right?
Yep.
It could also be empathetic energy, like, hey, look, we're in this together. It's going to be rough, but hey, let's stick it in, right? Let's keep going, right? So there's different types of energy. It's not just positive energy. It's also, energy of strength and empathy that you can kind of channel there. But that's it. The second part is the interactivity, and I like what we do for our all hands is very often we ask people to prepare a number of questions that we're then addressing in the all hands.
Yep. We
ask people to reflect on things and ask them to share openly in the all hands. And we also collaborate on a number of issues, such as, hey, of the issues that we're facing now, choose your top 3, and then we do it live in the all hands. But as I say, I don't think we've fully cracked it yet. I do feel there's something special about the energy of having people together, which still warrants these all hands.
Sure.
But they do need to kind of supersede the informational.
I mean, I love the idea, again, of the different types of energy. So even when it's like not great news, but you're coming together a team again, like we can do this together. We can, shoulder to shoulder. We're going to get through this. We're going to work hard. We're going to make it. So I like that idea of, again, it doesn't always have to be, rocky music and, okay, we closed $1 million deal or what have you. It's okay. There's other energy. There's other type of energy, and getting together as a team and sharing that energy. I can definitely take to that idea. So we spoke about synchronous meetings. We've spoken about, you've hinted about the pre-work that's done, the kind of questions that are shared. So what does the ideal synchronous meeting look like? And again, I want to do like a deep dive, like stuff that's prepared ahead of time. How long ahead of time? How long ahead of time is it shared? What exactly is shared ahead of time? Like during the meeting, what does engagement, all the things during the meeting, and post, right? I think that's probably one factor that many people don't think about, especially those leaders who are thinking, okay, when you do synchronous meetings, like for me, historically, I've always done, I set the very detailed agenda 2 days ahead of the meeting. I mentioned specific people. Here's what I'm expecting you out of this meeting. Like I need your approval. I need your assignment, whatever have you. And that's great and wonderful. But very few people think, okay, now that the meeting's finished, outside of, to-dos, okay, someone owns this specific task. Like, especially in those cases, as you grow globally and you hire people all over the world, like you have people from Vancouver to Indonesia, it's never times going to work for everybody, right? So those are kind of the perfect times for asynchronous where like you do a good time, you're in Central Europe. Well, Vancouver is off, Indonesia is off. So how do you engage and how do you involve those people who are on the other parts of the world and give them enough value from a synchronous meeting for at least for them to be asynchronous?
Yeah. Super good question, Scott. And it seems like a lot of the answers were already in your question. You're already doing a lot of the best practice stuff, right? I mean, I think, again, the whole prep, pre, during, post, best structure way to think about it. Let's start out with the pre. If you think about pre, it's basically in 2 big chunks. One thing is the meeting preparation from the side of the meeting host or facilitator. The other is the pre-work for the participants and onboarding to the meeting for the participants. On the facilitator side or host side, it's incredibly important to set up the agenda, set up all the various, or be very clear on the outcomes of the meeting before it takes place, be clear about the participant roles, the tools that need to be used, all of that stuff. So set up all of that. And that, again, in terms of timeline, it depends on the complexity of the meeting. It can be anything from 2-3 weeks in advance if you're running a really big, say, leadership workshop, or it could be a few days in advance or even a day in advance if you're running just a small brainstorming about a very particular topic. The second part is the participant preparation and onboarding, right? And that kind of goes down to giving participants clear context to what the meeting is about. Could be full agenda, but also just overall context is often good enough to kind of give prior to the session. Giving people the necessary pre-work or the necessary, at least, pre-information that makes sure that everyone is on the same page before the session takes place. Having people answer the questions that are necessary to kind of walk into the meeting. So pre-work is kind of split into respectively documents or getting people on the same informational side, and pre-work in terms of thinking, so allowing people to think through the main questions that will be discussed in the session. So those 2 big chunks, like pre-work facilitator and pre-work participants. During the session itself, again, the most important thing is to utilize all of the stuff that has been prepared. So make sure you use the agenda. Make sure you track towards the outcomes and the participant roles that you set up before the session takes place. And make sure that there's a clear facilitator. And I think that that's the absolutely most important point. Like, the meeting owner does not necessarily need to be the facilitator, but very often is, I'd say. Make sure you have clear takeaways documented during each session. Make sure you engage all participants to the points that the roles kind of allow or define, right? You don't necessarily need to involve, say, the CTO in the go-to-market part of the meeting if such a thing takes place, right? Sure. But you do need to kind of involve people on the relevant areas. And also, by the way, make sure that only the people that need to have a role in the meeting attend. Don't just invite people for informational reasons. You can always use both recordings and outcomes afterwards to kind of inform people. Present as little as possible, because like optimally, if you can do a meeting without presenting anything, then you've succeeded, because that mean that you managed to onboard everyone asynchronously correctly. After the meeting, I think this is one, again, as a previous consultant, that's one of my favorite bugbears. People simply don't think enough about the fact that there's a reason you have the meeting or the session, and it needs to have an impact afterwards. So make sure that the takeaways are, of course, clearly documented, the outcomes are captured, and make sure that you integrate these into workflows and that they're remembered and that they're followed up upon on an ongoing basis. And again, I'm mentioning all of this because this is exactly what we're building Butter for. We're not just building as a tool for the synchronous session itself. We know that the asynchronous components, both the pre-work and the post-work and integrating into workflows, is stuff that you need to have, which is what we're building for.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for going in depth there. I think there's a lot of great information. So the last question I have, I've spoken about this again many times. I personally believe there's three types of remote companies, right? Number one, we have the OG companies like the Doist and the Buffers and company. With those groups are the remote companies that launched pre-pandemic, like Butter, who were kind of doing remote the right way, right? They weren't forced to do it. They said, okay, we're going to do this before the pandemic ever hit. Great. Bucket number one. Bucket number two, companies that pivoted to remote during the pandemic, who were like, yes, we're embracing all the best practices of the future of work. Maybe async by default, I'm putting quotes here, hiring globally, 4-day work weeks, and all those other things. And then a majority of remote companies kind of sit today's bucket, and we like to call bucket number three, are they went remote either because they were kind of forced to, or they believe, okay, this is the future, but they're still very stuck in many of those old office mentalities and ways of working. And I think, again, the full calendar day of like synchronous meetings is probably like the prime example of what's kind of wrong with these type of groups here. So would love to hear your thoughts, especially building a platform for useful and valuable synchronous meetings. So for managers who are still stuck in kind of like these old ways of working, these office traditions, and are big fans of synchronous meetings and synchronous meetings and synchronous meetings, while the rest of their team are looking towards like asynchronous and just like, let me work. What's the best advice that you, as a CEO, in general, someone who's been doing remote work for a while, someone who's building a product for more valuable synchronous meetings, what's the best advice that you can give these leaders into kind of dropping those traditions and how to start rethinking how to organize the right meeting? Or thinking about when's the right time for a synchronous meeting, when's the right time for an asynchronous meeting. We'd love to hear your thoughts, because again, I think you have that experience across the board in different areas, and I think your thoughts would be extremely valuable here.
Thanks for believing us, Scott. I would hope they are, otherwise I guess I'm not the right person to do what I'm doing. Firstly, I really like your buckets, like the OGs, the newcomers, and the pivoters, I guess you can call them. I actually, firstly on that, I think it's really interesting to kind of look at the OGs versus the newcomers. I'd actually put us more in the newcomer bucket than an OG bucket. And especially in terms of the types of people and the processes they've built. They built very async, the OGs, and they're so heavy async, say, advocates. I actually think that a lot that also shows in the type of people they've attracted, and I think the OG remote workers are a bit different than the broader base of people, and I think that people that are more async by default in terms of personality and that prefer that have kind of gravitated towards those OGs, whereas we just cannot make everyone async by default, which is I think a big learning. I think the pivoters, or like the companies that are now being pushed to at least embrace hybrid or remote, which I also think is something, a very weird transition that we'll be seeing for 5, 10, 15 years, and a lot of mistakes will be made there.
Oh, yeah.
It's very interesting to follow. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
We could do a whole nother episode about how terrible hybrid is, and eventually what the one only possibility thing that will work for hybrid, but that's for another episode later on in the season.
That's for another episode, man. Like, it's a piece of its own. So back to like what piece of advice I can give to managers that have been stuck in the old ways, as they say.
Yeah.
Do what you should have been doing for years. Because I think so many people say, oh yeah, remote is very different, and you have to do a lot of different things than you'll do in the physical. Actually, I think remote is just a way of operating that forces you to do best practice across the board.
Yep.
And it is very much the same thing for sync meetings. Like all the things that I've said throughout this episode are things that should be just as relevant for physical meetings as they are for remote meetings. Be super aware of why you're calling them. Be super aware of the roles. Just don't take people in that just need to be in the meeting for informational purposes, and so on and so forth. Like the whole pre, during, post, just as relevant in the physical space as it is in the remote space.
Yeah.
So make sure you know why you have that meeting, and clarify all the things that I mentioned earlier in the episode.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that kind of remote leaders have been saying, and including myself. It's remote is now where you work. It's not a type of work, or it's basically where you work. And the new kind of idea of the way how you work is, again, we'll call it async by default. And it's not, again, just throwing out meetings, but it's, again, much more focused on deep work and results, and knowing when you need to have a synchronous meeting, you absolutely have it,
yes.
But having those right guidelines, and again, doing all the things that you said, the pre-work, the during work, the after work. And I think that's where the next iteration, because for me, so much of where the future of work is going, to be honest, I think really is anchored and relies on async by default, right? The biggest thing now, again, you can't offer remote work as a carrot to entice anybody to work for you anymore, right? It's a standard. So I've seen, at least the last 6-12 months, and like the next big thing has become like the 4-day work week. Like lots of countries are trying it, lots of startups are trying it. The only way 4-day work week works is by async by default, right? If you're sitting in like 3-4 hours of meetings every day, those 4 days you're working, or even half of them, you'll never have time to get your work done. And if you want to hire globally, again, if you have people in Vancouver, you have people in Indonesia, culturally, is it really fair to have somebody on in like 11 o'clock at night and like 6 o'clock in the morning? Not really. And a lot of those pieces are kind of anchored on functioning and working as operational, saying async by default. Again, having synchronous meetings when you need to, and even those cases, again, having that mix, right? So not getting those people in Indonesia and Vancouver on the call at that time, but still kind of giving them the value. Again, I could rant on this forever, but
no, but I think you're onto something super interesting there, because I think it's async by default, but I also think it's output and outcome focused instead of input focused.
Absolutely.
And I actually think that's where the, if I may, the 4-day work week is a fallacy, because it's not about, like when you're saying 4-day work week, you're still talking about input, right? I mean, you're talking about when people should be working. You're giving them directives as to when they should be working. I don't think that matters. I think remote does put a larger amount of responsibility on the individual for controlling their own time. And if they believe that they can do the same thing in 4 days that they would normally need 5 days to do that, by all means, do that. If they need 6 days to do it, well, then probably you might not be the right person for the job. But that's a different conversation. So there's just a lot of things about weaving life and work better and more healthier into each other, by putting a lot of responsibility, or more responsibility, on people's time on their own shoulders as well, while being very compassionate about it.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing we've learned through the pandemic was not, remote work. Everyone looks at remote. Remote was just something over here. It was really a quality of life, right? By not having to go to an office, we were able to spend more time doing the things we wanted to, with the people we wanted to do, opened up like a myriad of different opportunities and ways of living and all the other kind of stuff that goes with it. And this whole thing is more about that quality of life, and finally flipping the switch from living to work to working to live, which finally, again, we're finally getting there. But from what I see it, again, I think a 4-day work week is a great start towards getting the better quality of life, but it's not where we're going to end up. I think where we're ending up is exactly the point that you brought up. It's work is based on contribution or again, something beyond that, where we're going to the freelance model, right? That's how remote started. I remember at the beginning, 10 and a half years ago, when we were building Envision, you couldn't have in a job rec, oh, nice to have remote work experience, because we were like the third or fourth all remote company. Nobody existed back then. But the most successful people we hired were freelancers who were used to not having somebody looking over their shoulder, prioritizing time, get stuff done. And where we're going, I think, is back to that, especially with like async by default. There's no more schedules. Like there's no more Monday through Friday. There's no more 9 to 5. Hey, Jacob, I need this blog post launched by Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Scott, I need this bug fixed by Tuesday at 12 o'clock. What you would do between now and then, that's all up to you. You could do whatever it is, but I need that. And it's very much, again, focused on contribution. And I think that's a beautiful thing where, again, it's really going to give us the opportunity to really live the way we want to live and all those things like that. And it's exciting, to kind of see, you could see it, like you could see it there in the future. And like, we're slowly coming to that. And it's just like that baby step. Okay, now if we can shift companies towards like the asynchronous by default, again, giving it much more focus of, that's what I tell my two teams that I run are asynchronous by default. And I keep telling them, and nobody's worked in an asynchronous environment before. And many times, I know I got to fix my car. I got to go to this. Like I'll come in early, I'll come in late. I'm like, I don't care. Like, don't. You know what you need to do, right? You need to do this, you need to do that. By that time, like, do what you got to do. Take care of your car, take care of your pet, go for a walk, go, spend some time with your spouse. Hey, go live your life. So long as I get, or the company gets what we need by the time we need it, hey, go for it. Like, you don't need to come in and make up time. And I mean, that's the old way of working, right? If I needed to leave early for a doctor appointment at 4 o'clock, I'm going to come in at 8 o'clock just so I still have like my 9 hours or my 8 hours there. Like, no, I don't need to do this.
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, am I not glad that is not my life anymore? It's
absolutely
it's painful.
Amazing. Jacob, thank you so much for the fantastic conversation and really enlightening everyone who's listening onto the value of synchronous meetings and when to use, how to use it, and the right ways to do it. For people who want to learn and connect with you, learn more about Butter and connect with Butter, what's the best way to get a hold of you, connect with you, and connect with Butter?
On LinkedIn is probably the best possible way. It's where my presence is the most strongest. Or feel free to check out Butter at butter.us. It's free to sign up, and you can check out how that will help your synchronous sessions become more engaging.
Amazing. So I'll put those in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. Again, I think the value again here was very much of being a remote company before the pandemic, being a leader, building a tool for synchronous meetings and make them values, kind of putting all those, taking all those pieces in combination, kind of bringing them together, I think was extremely valuable. So Jacob, again, thank you so much for joining today. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. And until the next episode, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. I really hope you enjoyed it. My aim is for everyone listening to have one takeaway from each episode they can then go and use with their teams. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, on our YouTube channel, share it with friends and colleagues, and please feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website.